Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Raja Janaranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Asto Tarasapta Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Asto Tarasapta Sri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai.
Jai.
Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai.
Jai.
Prem Sigaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vatsadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai.
Jai.
Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai.
Jai.
Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai.
Jai.
Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai.
Jai.
Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai.
Jai.
Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai.
Jai.
Srila Ishvarapuri Ki Jai.
Jai.
Amaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai.
Jai.
Gaura Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru Sri Gauranga. All glories to Sri Prabhupada. I'm Om Vishnu Dai. Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamana Stay Saraswati Devi Gauranga Jani. Nirvishesha Shuni Bari Pashchati Veshata. Om Manjnana Timiranda Shajnananjana Shalakaya Chakchur Umilitum Jena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyas Chakrapa Sindhubhya Evacha Aditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, thank you for joining. Today is the disappearance day of Srila Ishvarapuri. So before we begin class, I'm going to say a few words on Ishvarapuri. Get to my notes here. So Srila Ishvarapuri played a very important role in our parampara. As Srila Prabhupada points out at the beginning of most of his books, we have a direct disciplic succession coming down from Krishna. And in our particular line, the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, from Krishna, the instructions go to Lord Brahma, and the Chatur Shloki of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then they're expanded down to Narad, and then on and on. The 21st position in that parampara is held by Srila Ishvarapuri. Ishvarapuri was a disciple of Madhavendra Puri. Some of Madhavendra Puri's other disciples are Srila Advaita Acharya, Nityananda, and Parmananda Puri, among others, of course. Madhavendra Puri is the first Acharya in our line to really delve into and preach about Madhurya Ras. So he holds a very important position. But Ishvarapuri, he was a very intimate disciple of Madhavendra Puri, especially toward the end of his life. When Madhavendra Puri became advanced in age, he became somewhat of an invalid, and Ishvarapuri took good care of him, cleaned up after him, all while chanting the holy names and reciting the Lord's pastimes to keep his spiritual master's consciousness always focused on Krishna and his pastimes. So Madhavendra Puri was so happy and pleased with the service of Ishvarapuri that he gave the benediction that he would become a great devotee and lover of Krishna. Toward the end of his own life, Ishvarapuri instructed his two personal servants named Govinda and Kashishvara to go to Jagannath Puri and personally serve Lord Chaitanya. Ishvarapuri is the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. After Jagannath Mishra left his body, Lord Chaitanya he was then Nehemiah Pandit, of course. Young Nehemiah Pandit took a pilgrimage to Gaya to perform the Shraddha rites for his father. And there, by providence, Ishvarapuri was also there. And so Nehemiah Pandit, of course, was very happy to see him there. He was very inspired, and he wanted to take initiation from him. This, of course, wasn't the first time they met. Ishvarapuri, at one point, was traveling incognito throughout India. And when he came to Navadvip, he stayed at the house of, I think it was Gopinath Acharya, who's the brother-in-law of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, another intimate devotee of Lord Chaitanya. So while Ishvarapuri was in Navadvip, Lord Chaitanya saw him, and although Lord Chaitanya, as in Nehemiah Pandit at the time, and although Nehemiah Pandit he wasn't outwardly showing his opulences of being the Supreme Lord at the time. Every once in a while, he would show someone in secret, like there were some people who, when he was a baby, these two fellows decided to kidnap him to steal his jewelry from him. And so the Lord showed his opulences and bewildered these two kidnappers, and they ended up back in the courtyard of Jagannath Mishra and Mother Sachi, and they decided instead they'll just put the baby back and run away. So there was some opulence there. There was also some opulence when a Brahmana stayed at the house of Jagannath Mishra and Mother Sachi, and he was cooking an offering for his deity, and baby Nehemiah would come and eat the offering every time he was trying to make the offering, because of course he was calling the Lord to take the offering, and Lord Chaitanya, as the Supreme Lord himself, would come and take that. And after 3 spoiled attempts of making cleansing the altar and making a fresh new offering for his deity, the Brahmana was then able to receive darshan of Lord Chaitanya, to see his full opulence, understand that he's the Supreme Lord. There are also other incidences, like there would be footprints around the house when Nehemiah was just born, and they would have the signs like that are on Krishna's feet, the umbrella, conch, things like that, elephant, goat, and but Jagannath Mishra and Mother Sachi just figured, oh, our Gopal deity must be walking around the room, and that's who left the footprints, because our child, he's too young, and also these have very auspicious markings, so this is the Supreme Lord. So sometimes, but very rarely, and only in private, at this point in his life, Nehemiah Pandit would just sometimes, very seldomly, show his opulence. But Ishvarapuri, as a very dear devotee of Krishna, he could see just in Nehemiah Pandit's bodily features and his behavior, he understood that this was actually the Supreme Lord, even though he wasn't displaying it outwardly. And so Nehemiah Pandit asked Ishvarapuri to come to lunch. So he came and he had lunch. And then while Ishvarapuri was staying at the house of Gopinath Acharya, each day for a couple of hours, he would recite from his book. Let's see, that was called Sri Krishna Lilamrita. And Nehemiah Pandit would sit there and listen, and also Advaita Acharya would also be attending those discussions. So that was the first time they met. But back to Gaya. So in Gaya, when the Lord asked Ishvarapuri for initiation, Ishvarapuri said, "Wait, you want me to give you a mantra? I'm prepared to give you my life and soul. You're the Supreme Lord." so he certainly didn't feel like he was worthy of becoming Lord Chaitanya's spiritual master, but he agreed to. According to the Bhakti Ratnakar, when Ishvarapuri was going to give Lord Chaitanya the Gayatri mantra, and most of us know that when this happens, the Guru whispers the mantra into the disciple's ear, and then the disciple repeats it. This is how it goes. So in the Sri Bhakti Ratnakar, it is mentioned that Lord Chaitanya actually, he said, "Is this the correct mantra?" And then he whispered the mantra into Ishvarapuri's ear, and then Ishvarapuri repeated it back. So in that way, although formally Ishvarapuri was the spiritual master, he also became a disciple of the Supreme Lord himself in that way. After taking initiation from Srila Ishvarapuri, Lord Chaitanya, as an obedient disciple, immediately began to interject Krishna and Krishna's pastimes into all of his teachings. So at that point, Nehemiah Pandit was a great scholar. Everyone knew about him. He taught grammar and logic. And so from that point on, after receiving initiation from Srila Ishvarapuri, he then would, all of the lessons, all of the instructions that he gave, it was all centered around Krishna. So he would be explaining grammar according to Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's different names, like that. So from that point on, he only spoke of Krishna. Now, prior to that, as I mentioned, he wasn't really showing his opulences. He actually used to perform a whole lot of mischief. We can read about those pastimes in Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. Even the devotees at the time, so there were some devotees like Advaita Acharya and Srivas Thakur and others, and a lot of the devotees were actually afraid of him because Nehemiah Pandit, the great scholar, would go around and challenge everyone to debates, and he would always win. So some of the devotees would just actually try to avoid seeing him, and others like Advaita Acharya and Srivas Thakur, they would just say, if this Nehemiah Pandit becomes a devotee, he would be so influential because he's so intelligent. So in this way, Lord Chaitanya showed by example that no matter what your behavior is before initiation, even if you're inadvertently tormenting the devotees, that once you become initiated, then your behavior should change. You should only speak of matters of Krishna, and everything you do, you should give the proper example. And so in this way, Srila Ishvarapuri is an extremely important link in our disciplic succession as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's spiritual master. And we should always express our gratitude for him, not only on this day, his disappearance day, but every day. So now we will begin today's class. But first we will invoke auspiciousness by chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
So we will continue our 10th canto study. We are still in chapter 13, and today's verse, if I'm not mistaken, is 52. Do we have that coming up on the screen? Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. What's that?
Chapter 14, right, Prabhuji?
Chapter 13, text 52. it can become confusing because chapter 13 and 14 are both talking about a similar pastime. But
Okay,
this
please
is
pray.
just
Yeah,
this is
please go ahead, Prabhuji. Thank you.
okay. Animadyar mahimad mabhir ajadyabhir vibhutibi chatur vingsatibish tatvai parita mahad adibhi animadyar mahi mabhir ajadyabhir vibhutibi chatur vimshatibish tatvai parita mahad adibhi anima dyar mahim abhir ajadyabhir vibhutibihi chatur vimshatibish tatvai parita mahad adibhi. Please chant.
Animadyer mahimadbir acharyabir vibhutibi chaturvim shatibistatvai parita mahar adhibi. Ramchandra.
Hare Krishna. Animadayar mahimabhir ajadayabhir vibhutibhih chaturvir satibhis tatvai parita mahadadabhih.
Hare Krishna. Animadhyir mahimabhir ajadyabhir vibhutibhi chaturvishetibistatve parita mahad adibhi.
Animadyar Mahamadbar Ajadyabar Vibhatibahi Chaturvim Satibis Tatvai Parita Mahad Adibihi.
Ani Madhya Mahi Madhi Ajanabi Vibhutibi Chaturvimsatibi Tattva Paritamahar Adibhi.
Animadhyairmahimabhir ajadhyabhir vibhutibhi chaturvimsatibhistatvai parita mahad adibhi.
Animadhyairmahimabhir ajadyabhir chaturvimshatibhistatvai parita mahadatbhihi.
Hare Krishna. Animadair mahim bhir ajadyabhir vibhutibhi chaturvimsati bis tatvahi parita mahad adibhi. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Animatyar mahimabhir ajadyabhir vibhutibhi chaturvimshadibhis tatvai parita mahad adibhi. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Is that everyone? Okay. Anima Adyai, headed by Anima. Mahi Mabhihi, by opulences. Aja Adyabihi, headed by Aja. Vibhutibi, by potencies. Chatuhu Vimsat Bihi, 24 in number. Tatvai, by elements for the creation of the material world. Paritaha, all the Vishnu Murtis were surrounded. Mahat Adibihi, headed by the Mahat Tattva. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. All the Vishnu Murtis were surrounded by the opulences, headed by Anima Siddhi, by the mystic potencies, headed by Aja, and by the 24 elements for the creation of the material world, headed by the Mahat Tattva. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. So what I'll do is I'll actually read through this purport first. There are a lot of technical terms. I'm going to get back to those once we read through the entire purport. In this verse, the word Mahimabhihi means Aishvarya, or opulence. The Supreme Personality of Godhead can do whatever he likes. That is his Aishvarya. No one can command him, but he can command everyone. Sad Aishvarya Purnam. The Lord is full in 6 opulences. The yoga siddhis, the perfections of yoga, such as the ability to become smaller than the smallest anima siddhi, or bigger than the biggest mahima siddhi, are present in Lord Vishnu. Sadaishvaryai Purno Ya Iha Bhagavan. Caitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, 1st chapter, verse 3. The word Aja means Maya, or mystic power. Everything mysterious is in full existence in Vishnu. The 24 elements mentioned are the 5 working senses, Pancha Karmendriya, the 5 senses for obtaining knowledge, Pancha Jnanendriya, the 5 gross material elements, Pancha Mahabhut, the 5 sense objects, Pancha Tanmatra, the mind, Manas, the false ego, Ahankara, the Mahat Tattva, and material nature, Prakriti. All 24 of these elements are employed for the manifestation of this material world. The Mahat Tattva is divided into different subtle categories, but originally it is called the Mahat Tattva. Okay, so there are a lot, like I mentioned, there are a lot of terms in here that may require a little bit more explanation. Let me switch over to my notes here. So just a little bit of context first. Lord Brahma, he saw, okay, I stole the boys, but now, the boys are still there. And so then he checks, makes sure, and now he sees 2 sets of boys. And then all of a sudden, this other set of boys that Lord Krishna manifests himself as are showing up in these beautiful blue forms dressed in yellow with all these Vishnu Murtis are coming out of these, the forms of the cowherd boys and the calves that Sri Krishna expanded as. And in yesterday's class, we also saw that all of the living entities around, even the inanimate ones, were worshiping the Lord, were surrounding the Lord and worshiping him in whatever possible way they could, depending on their, status of life. And so here we're just getting a little bit more information of what opulences each of these Vishnu forms was surrounded by. So one of the things that was mentioned was the 8 yoga siddhis. Of course, Anima and Mahima were mentioned. The other 6, if anyone is interested, are Laghima, which is the potency where one can become lighter than a feather. Prapti is the Prapti Siddhi is the ability to get anything from anywhere. It's basically, some yogis can do this. They basically fold space so they can reach out, and then out of apparently thin air, they pull, whatever is on the other side of the even universe and hand it to you. That's Prapti Siddhi. Prakamya Siddhi is the power to never be frustrated in any desire. Comes in handy. Ishitva Siddhi is to act freely, and you can even create or destroy anything at will. Also very powerful. Vashitva is the ability to control all of the material elements. And then Kama Vasayita is the ability to change one's shape or form to whatever one desires. I mean, we see this come up with, like, Shakatasura. He assumed the shape of a cart, and he was planning on crushing baby Krishna, but Lord Krishna kicked him, and he lost his life and collapsed. And we also know that Putana, although she was a Rakshashi, who they're generally not all that attractive, she assumed the form of a beautiful demigoddess, and that's how she was able to enter the home of Lord Krishna to breastfeed him. So anyway, these are the 8 mystic yoga siddhis. They can be attained. They are just manipulations of matter. They are actually a science, a very subtle science, but a science indeed, and it's extremely rare to master these, but it's quite possible. Then we have another list. So that was the list headed by Anima. Then there was another list headed by Aja, and it also mentioned the 6 opulences. So it seems to me, based on, I was looking this up to see exactly what this could be referring to, and so I have two lists, and they're actually the same list. One's just a shorter version of the list. But from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, the 89th chapter, text 54 through 56 mentions that the Lord's consort potencies, which are listed as Pushti, Shri, Kirti, and Aja. Pushti being the energy for nourishment or strength, Shri being the energy of beauty, and Kirti being the energy of reputation or fame, and Aja being the energy of material creation. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the purport that Aja referred to Maya. Now this list, obviously this could be the list, but it also could be a more comprehensive list. It could be referring to, and this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, 39th chapter, text 53 through 55. Now this list doesn't specifically say Aja, but it does talk about the different aspects of Aja. So this list, which is given in the 39th chapter, first it lists the Lord's principal internal potencies, which are Shri, Pushti, Gir, Kanti, Kirti, Tushti, Ila, and Urja. And then his material potencies, Vidya, Avidya, and Maya. And his internal pleasure potency, Shakti. Now, commenting on that verse, Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur explains what those potencies are. So Shri is wealth, Pushti is strength, Gir is knowledge, Kanti beauty, Kirti fame, and Tushti renunciation. So those are the 6 opulences, which are also mentioned in the verse. Then Ila is his Bhu Shakti, also known as Sandhini, the internal potency of whom the element earth is an expansion. Urja is his internal potency for performing pastimes. She expands as the Tulsi plant in this particular world. Vidya and Avidya, knowledge and ignorance, are external potencies who cause the living entities liberation and bondage respectively. And Shakti is his internal pleasure potency. Maya is an internal potency who is the basis of vidya and avidya. So that's the list headed by Aja. So these are just different opulences that are surrounding all these Vishnu forms. Now, aside from those, we also found that the 24 elements were also surrounding each Vishnu form. These were the Pancha Karmendriya, the 5 working senses, which, if you're curious, that would be the voice, the legs for getting around, the hands for performing work, the anus and the genitals. Then there are the knowledge acquiring senses, the Pancha Jnanendriya. Those are, of course, the ears, the eyes, the nose, the tongue, and the skin. Then there were the Pancha Mahabhut, the 5 gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Then there were the Pancha Tanmatra, the objects of the senses, which are smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Smell being aroma, not the. Now, as far as these 24, so there are obviously different ways to break down the elements in the material world. The modern scientists, of course, have, the periodic table of elements. And, we have the simplified version, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, which the modern scientists would call solid. Solid would be the earth, water would be all of the liquids, fire would be all of the energetic elements, air would be all of the gaseous elements, and ether would be space. So that actually, ether isn't even on the periodic table. It's the space that these elements can occupy. So, all of the metals and minerals, those are earth. All of the liquids, they all fall within the category of water. The elements that produce power, lithium, ion, things like that, those all fall in the category of fire. The gaseous ones, they all, oxygen, hydrogen, helium, they all fall within air. And then, like I said, ether's not even on the periodic table. So there are different ways to categorize the elements of material creation. And in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 22nd chapter, Uddhava was asking Krishna, because Uddhava heard many great sages talking about the elements of material creation, and each of them sort of gave a different number. And so Uddhava asked Lord Krishna, I'll just read texts 1 through 3. He said, he inquired, "My dear Lord, O Master of the universe, how many different elements of creation have been enumerated by the great sages? I have heard you personally describe a total of 28, which are God, the Jiva soul, the Mahat Tattva, false ego, the 5 gross elements, the 10 senses, the mind, the 5 subtle objects of perception, and the 3 modes of nature. But some authorities say that there are 26 elements, while others cite 25, or else 7, 9, 6, 4, or 11. And even others say that there are 17, 16, or 13. What did each of these sages have in mind when he calculated the creative elements in such different ways? O Supreme Eternal, kindly explain this to me." Now, the rest of that chapter goes on to explain how each of these sages were enumerating the material elements. And according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, all of these different analytic approaches mentioned by Uddhava, they're not contradictory. They're just methods of categorizing the exact same reality. So some of the calculations, for example, all of the subtle elements, mind, intelligence, false ego, all fall under the chitta, the polluted consciousness. And so there's different ways to enumerate. So when we see lists like this, and some might argue, well, that's not a complete list. Like I mentioned, the periodic table, talks about 4 out of the 5 of the elements that we give, but it gives them in a much more expanded version. And so one might say, oh, see, this is a more comprehensive list, but it's not. It's actually everything falls into these categories. And then, they forgot ether. That's what sound travels through. So basically what's going on here is, so all of these Vishnu forms, they're surrounded by all of the opulence of Vishnu, but also you have these 24 elements of material creation that are centered around each of these Vishnu forms. And what does that mean? Because that's actually something that's significant, that we tend to, in modern times, we tend to disconnect these two things. And in one sense, you would think, okay, well, these qualities, at least the Lord's internal qualities, they make sense that they'd be surrounding. When we get to some of the external potencies, we would start thinking, well, those wouldn't necessarily need to be there. And then when we get to the 24 elements, then we're like, yeah, it's what's the significance here? And the significance is that the Lord being the source of all of these things, this is just how, we can't accept these 24 elements without accepting the source of those elements, without accepting that they came from Krishna, that they're surrounding Krishna, expanding from him. And so we have this term called Sankhya, and it's determining the nature of things. It's science. And what we have to understand, we as devotees in this current age, we have to understand what is actually science and what is not science, or what we call nescience. So science is being able to analyze these elements to understand what they are, but it's also understanding where they came from and what their purposes are. Even the great scientists, the well-known scientists like Nikola Tesla, Da Vinci, Edison, Franklin, they all delved into spirit. Nikola Tesla, for example, he understood, he's a true scientist. He was always looking for alternative forms of energy. And when he noticed that life is actually an energy, and so he started trying to study these elements, the elements of the body, when he understood that, chemically, there's no difference between a dead body and a live body, that there had to be something there. So he started studying the Upanishads, which talk about the nature of the soul. Of course, he, as a scientist, was trying to be able to quantify the soul, not only as an observable trait. So it's observable that, chemically, there's no difference between a live body and a dead body. So you can come to the conclusion logically that something is there, but you just can't measure it in a way that you can measure all of the other elements. And so he was trying to figure out a way to not only measure it, but also use it as a source of energy. And so a lot of these other scientists, the true scientists, they would think in this way, and they would understand, at least accept, that there is something beyond their current level of perception. Maybe someday they would actually be able to in their eyes. But they accepted that. The trouble with so-called scientists these days is that they no longer accept that. Some of them do. It's very rare that they do. But what they do instead is they base everything off of what they can only on what they can perceive, which one would just say, okay, that's just a lower form of science, but it's still accurate. The problem with that is all of these scientists that are doing this, they're basing all of their research and all of their inventions and all of their technological advancements, they're basing it all on a false premise that there is only matter and that life comes from matter, right? Now, this is a theory that some scientists had, like Darwin, for example. He had this theory of evolution, things evolve. And Darwin himself even said, you know, if one studies Darwin, he actually says that he could be wrong. This is a theory. He could be wrong. And if it's shown that, you know, that these simple celled organisms cannot be assembled by chance, that there's only, you know, one way that they can work, and then obviously that there's some intelligence that, you know, put it there, that he accepted that he could be wrong if you read him directly. But anyone that came after him, most that came after him, they just assumed, oh no, evolution is a fact and we are going to base everything off of that. Same with what's known as the Big Bang theory. It's called a Big Bang theory, but it's accepted as a fact. And then what we do is we accept that premise as if it were a fact, and then build up things based on that being a fact and say, well, since that's a fact, now we can build up the rest of, you know, our logic. And so anyone who knows logic understands that if you begin with a premise that is not actually established as truth, then anything that's built upon that can't be accepted as truth. So a lot of what scientists are dealing with now, not only are they the inferior material nature, but they're also based on false premise. So although some of what science has come up with can be utilized, obviously everything can be utilized for Krishna service. So although some of it is certainly able to be utilized, most of it's based on false premise, and it's not understanding where the source of everything comes from. And so it's not a full picture of what actually is going on. So here we see that all of these elements are surrounding these Vishnu forms, reminding us that everything comes from Krishna. Now, what does this all mean for us? What this means for us, and I'm going to end this soon because I've realized I've run over time. But so in Bhagavad Gita, the end of the 5th chapter, Srila Prabhupada, he calls this verse the peace formula. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridham sarvabhutanam jnatfamam shantam richati. That Bhoktaram yajna tapasam. So Krishna, he's the beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities. He's the source of them. He's who they're for, and who gives the results of all of those. He's the Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Sarvaloka means all of the planets. He's the supreme lord of all the planets and of the demigods. Suhridam, he's the benefactor, and Srila Prabhupada adds well-wisher, because Hrida comes from heart. So it's not just a benefactor, but it's also a well-wisher of Sarvabhutanam, all of the living entities. And one who knows this, Jnattvamam, one who knows Krishna as all of those, he gains relief from the pangs of material misery, or attains peace. And so this is the way that one can not only become peaceful and happy, but understand things actually as they are. One should understand that everything comes from Krishna. And when one is able to do this, then his life starts making a whole lot more sense. We're no longer spinning our wheels. And so before I stop, I just want to remind everyone, earlier on in the chapter, Lord Brahma, he was considering how could this child be the sole enjoyer of all sacrifices, the Yajna. He's looking at him and he knows, but he's looking at him, and there Krishna is. And, he's a little kid, and he's joking around with his friends, and he's got in his left hand, he's got this, rice and yogurt and fruit mixture, and it's like, dripping down his hand. And it seems uncultured. He's Balakali. He's playing with all these other children. And how is this supposed to be the Yajna, the one who eats only the sacrifices that are given by the Brahmanas? And so he's thinking in this way, and for him it's a logical thought, right? And so he wants to do this test, let's call it an experiment, a scientific experiment, because he thinks, okay, well, no, how can it possibly be like that? And so he does that. He forgets that, no, he is Yajnabuka, everything comes from him. And he tries to play a trick. And so as we learned from last week, or maybe it was even before that when an inferior person tries to show their mystic opulence before a superior, it completely diminishes. It's like a glowworm, trying to brag to the sun, like, hey, look how bright I am. A glowworm's insignificant. So in the same way, when we think that we're becoming logical, and then we think we're questioning, Krishna's supremacy, and I don't know if everything I'm reading is true. Science is telling me this, and I believe it, so I'm just going to follow this instead. It's not like that. Science is mentioned in our process is a scientific process, and it goes all the way through to the source. It's not just, manipulating part of the Lord's nature. It's actually understanding all of it. And when we understand science in this way, not just trying to focus on one part, but, take it to its goal, then anything, even the things that these scientists are working on, developing, we can use those in Christian service, but we have to see that connection. We have to understand it. And we can't put our faith in just a subsection of what Krishna is, if we truly want to regain his kingdom, regain our eternal position with him. So I've gone way over, and I apologize for that. Please forgive that. But we'll stop here and see if there are any questions, comments, additions, challenges, like that. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Hare
Krishna.
Thank you. Very detailed, scientific, as you mentioned. I'm glad you went into the detail, because for me, I was very confused. I was trying to visualize what this looks like, and when you start visualizing that, these Vishnu Murtis are surrounded by, physical opulence, you can understand that. Okay, maybe there was, Lakshmi's around him. Maybe there was, physical things that were there, helmets and gold and, horses or whatever it may have been. But when you start talking about subtle elements, like, the three gunas. Now, when we understand the three gunas, we kind of see that they're like influences that, very subtle influences that little influences, but physically, like around, like, how would this look? The 24 elements, how do they manifest as personalities that surround him? Or is this just something inconceivable that, like, almost like the universal form, like all these things are just being presented out of everything in the universe, everything's just kind of working?
Yeah, it's more like the universal form. Yeah, it's more like the universal form. So it's perceived as an idea that all of these things are coming from him. Visually, I don't know what that looked like, but that's certainly what came across.
Thank you.
I mean, you see these different depictions that the devotees try to make of the universe, where they all look different. And we don't know exactly what it looked like. We can't really depict it, because so many things have to be going on. No matter what we try to put, because everything is in the universal form. We can't put everything in it. You see time and you see space, you see everything. So nobody can actually depict that, but you can experience it if Krishna shows it to you. But yeah, that's basically, they were kind of many universal forms that were each of those Vishnu Murtis.
Now, do these different qualities, influences, potencies, do they manifest as like personalities? Sometimes, like, I have like actual like forms, like they actually take like the Mother Ganga. She's manifests as a river, but she's also like a person. I don't know. Do these agencies of Maya of the material influence, do they also manifest as kind of people, or are they just kind of energy?
Sometimes. Like one example that was in one of the purports I was reading from. Let me get back to it. Was talking about the Tulsi plant. And so also Vrinda Devi. So that was Urja, internal potency for pastimes. And so in the spiritual world, that's Vrinda Devi. And also she serves Purnamasi. Then here in the material world, it's Tulsi, the plant. So sometimes there's a personification of these. And other times it's just like a representation. Like earth, water, fire, air, ether. I don't know if there's a personification of those, but sorry, I can't answer that better.
Thank you. I'm just trying to visualize what this.
Yeah, it's hard to visualize, like I said, but we can at least conceptualize. We can understand what it meant, and what it meant is that all of these things come from the Supreme Lord, and that we have to see it in that way. We can't see these things as separate. We can't even see ourselves as separate, because if we do, then our consciousness is completely polluted, and we can't make any advancement whatsoever. And that's why the conclusion was the peace formula, that we have to be able to see Krishna in all of those things always. And when we can do that, when we see reality in that way, then we can gradually make advancement. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Vatsala Ashok, you have your hand up, please.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. You can my humble pranam and glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much. You have elaborately explained everything to us, but it is very inconceivable for human beings, because we are not in a saintly status, or at least in a superior position, to understand what Krishna is doing, what he can do, what he possesses. It's very difficult for us to, even conceive certain ideas. And I like the way you explained the periodic table, and I mean, the little bit leaning towards scientific mind, little bit of scientific mind. And also I liked your idea of bringing out Da Vinci, Edison, Franklin, and Nicholas. And I don't know whether every one of them were doing the soul research, because you said I didn't know about Nicholas studied Upanishads. That was an interesting fact for me. And what did you find out at the final conclusion about the soul? Did he stop at the, in the middle of the way, or I don't know which century he lived? I don't know. I have forgotten some of the facts. So could you just go over and tell me what he found out about the soul, and what was his conclusion? I may go and do a little research on that too. Thank you so much for all this effort you put in to do research on different things. It's very difficult for ordinary human beings to understand, everything that is there to know. Thank you. I would appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, so Nikola Tesla, he it is documented that he did study the Upanishads, and his reason for doing so. It was toward the end of his life, so I'm not sure if it documents what exactly what conclusions he came to, or like that, but he was certainly trying to harness the power of life, and in order to do that, he was studying the Upanishads. I could tell you that. And I even think he was seeing maybe a specific, I don't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was a specific guru that he was talking to, or a saintly person. But yeah, it's there. You can look that up if that is something that interests you. But the main point is that, they understood that there was something more. And the other scientists that I mentioned, not necessarily the soul, but they understood that there was something more. They couldn't necessarily name it, but they understood that something was there. They valued life. Most of the ones I mentioned were at least vegetarian because they understood that, life is something that's sacred and shouldn't be, whimsically ended because of, in the name of giving someone energy for a few hours like that. So they had different levels of realization, but they were true scientists. They at least understood what they were studying, and they made changes in their lives based on what they would observe instead of ignoring them and just saying, oh no, let's just focus on this stuff. Now, when I talk about these things, it can seem like I'm down on science and advancement and technology, and I'm not. Anything can be used in Krishna service. What I am down on is when people think that it is superior in some way to the devotional path, because it's not. It is a very small subsection of science, and it is science if it's actually going in that direction. But if it's just manipulation of the lower materials and trying to claim that is the ultimate goal, then that's what I have an issue with, because it's not the ultimate goal. It's not even a goal. It's if that's what the motive is, then it's a waste of time.
Yeah, are these scientists moving to a godless society? I don't know. I mean,
well, not all of them are, but some of them are. It's certainly, everything in the material world is designed to drive people in that direction. That's what the material world's for. But there are also, it's a rare thing, but there are societies, or even just, like I said, subsections of people in different societies that are interested in going the other way, up. And so, you'll have that. So it's not that anything is inherently good or bad. Anything can be used for Krishna service. But if you look at the majority of the so-called scientific community, then yes, they are trying to establish a godless society.
Thank you so much for taking your time to explain. Thank you so much, Prabhu. We learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
And Srila Prabhupada would often quote this Bengali proverb. He'd say, take their pestle and their mortar and break their teeth. Tora sil, Tora nota, Tora bangidantara goda. Means that you can use the instruments of the scientists against them to defeat them. So in other words, we don't just say they're wrong. We prove that they're wrong. And we don't just prove that they're wrong by, citing Shastra. We prove that they're wrong by using their own science against them. We challenge them when they say that life comes from matter. Okay, well then make it. Make that chemical compound that magically gives life, and they can't do it. And so, and that's one of the bases that they try to establish other things on. And that's a scientific fallacy. You can't, a mathematical fallacy. You can't prove something if one of your bases is not established. You can't build upon it if it's not established. It's a logical fallacy too. So yeah, we have no problem with the ones that are actually scientific and they can accept, okay, just because we can't quantify it, we can't put it in a beaker and tell you how much it weighs or how big it is. But obviously there's something there. Those scientists, yeah, we love them because they're scientific. They're not ignoring things that are in front of them, even though they can't quantify it, they at least can perceive it, right? And so, yeah, science we got no problem with, but the misuse of science, what Srila Prabhupada would call nescience, that's what we have an issue with. And that's applied in many different fields, not just the scientific field, but entertainment and everything else. If it's not bringing you toward Krishna, then it's a waste of time. And
Yes.
if it is, then do it. That's the basic formula.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
Prabhu, can I ask you one more?
Of course.
There is no else. You picked only those scientists that was being referred. I mean, there are Albert Einstein, and there are so many other scientists I have read about. So I haven't heard of them. So is it any specific reason for that? Choosing only some of them out of everybody? I mean, all the people that we know.
You know, I don't do a whole lot of research into the scientists because, like I said, a lot of them aren't really, you know, helping our goal. But while I was doing research for the fifth canto Vedic cosmology, I was writing curriculum for the Srimad Bhagavatam, so that it was certainly pertinent for me to understand at least some of what the scientists were saying. So these are just some that I came across.
Okay.
And you know, in the Srila Upanishad, it says that it's important to learn vidya and avidya side by side, but it has to be, the goal has to be that you're making your way toward Krishna. So, and these are just, you know, interesting tidbits I found, and that's it. I know I don't really feel inclined or impelled to study more about Nikola Tesla, because I just understand that his intentions were at least honorable, and that's good. But what we want to tap into is you know, Vedic knowledge, because that's where he was going in that direction. But if we go right to the source, the Vedic knowledge, you know, we study the Upanishads and we study, you know, the Puranas, then, you know, we can skip over all of the things that he misunderstood. Because although he did the right thing, it doesn't mean that everything he did in his life was the right thing. So what we do is we find someone, a spiritual master, who actually does everything right and is linked up to the parampara and is not just happening upon it by luck, right? And so that's who we want to pay more attention to. We don't necessarily want to, you know, just because somebody got something right. Like, for example, the distance from the Earth to the sun. You know, the scientists, what they say and what the Bhagavatam says, it's actually the same. So one can say, see, look, the scientists were right. Yeah, okay, so they were right about one thing, but it doesn't mean they're right about all of the other things. So therefore, you know, you don't want to make that conclusion and then start just only listening to the scientists instead of just referring to the Puranas, because that's what's going to get you back to Krishna, you know. Not, you know, the scientists just happen to be right on one thing, good for them. You know, if you make a painting of a clock, it's right twice a day, you know, big deal, you know, but you don't want to go by that clock because it doesn't move, you know. So, so so as far as I'm concerned, when the scientists when their theories or their calculations coincide with what's given in the Vedas, then I accept it. But I accept it because it's confirmed. I don't accept it because they said it. I accept it because, oh, that's confirmed. Yeah, that's right. Good job. Well done. You've calculated that properly. Now continue on, you know, like that. But and not all of them do that. So yeah, what we as aspiring Vaishnavas want to focus on is you know, reestablishing our original position with Krishna, and the best way to do that is just completely focus on Shastra, Guru, and Sadhus, and you know, like that. And that's our best policy.
Thank you again, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Dronacharya.
Yeah, wonderful class, very informative.
Thank you, Prabhu.
This was recorded on YouTube, so it'll be, if anybody wants to listen to it or pass it on to anyone, you can direct them to our Philadelphia YouTube channel. We have another class coming up at 9 o'clock, so we should probably end here. The class is for our Bengali devotees. As always, our gratitude to you, Charachandra Prabhu, for sharing with us. It's a very important understanding.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thanks a million. Thank you so much. We
Thank
understand things.
Thank you.
A lot of things to understand.
Yeah. So much.
I'm sorry that you'll have me for 3 weeks in a row, but then the silver lining is Mother Sue Devi will also have 3 weeks in a row at the end of the month. So you tolerate the cloud. It's like, right now the weather is kind of cold, but it's starting to get warm. So it's like, it's the same sort of way. You have to tolerate Charachandra, and then you'll get Sue Devi.
Okay.
So thank you.
Whatever Krishna gives, take it. Thank you.
We'll
Yes,
take
yes.
it.
Thank you so
It-
much.
Very good.
Thank you very
it's-
much, Prabhu.
Yeah,
It's,
thank
it's nectar every way,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Have a
Krishna.
wonderful day, devotees. See you again tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna. One real quick, everybody. At least I know Mother Vinjavali, you're out in California. I don't know what it is today out there, but in Philadelphia, we're observing Ekadasi today. Even though in the calendar it's Dwadasi.
Yeah, for
fasting.
excuse me, Prabhu. For us, they said yesterday. I did yesterday.
Okay, all right, you're out there. So in Philadelphia, we're doing observing Ekadasi today.
That's right.
Fasting.
Anyway, we can do every day.
So along with Ishvarapuri and keeping our
That's good for
remembrance
health.
and focus on Ishvarapuri,
That's true.
we can also observe this Ekadasi and increase our devotional activities, hearing and chanting. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Should go through these chakras and do the chakra.
Pya Shapata Bhavati Pya Vaishnavi Pya Namo Namo.